Log Analytics query examples for events and syslog. Sample queries that you can use to search and analyze logs collected in Azure Log Analytics. Azure Advisor, a service that provides personalized recommendations to help optimize your Azure resources. This can be accessed from cost management as well. Unused disks from virtual machines can be point using Storage Explorer, account management properties. Extension Profile, custom script extension ARM, a feature in Azure Resource Manager, ARM, templates that enables you to execute scripts on Azure VMs during deployment and post-deployment. Application Security Group, a way to group virtual machines, VMs, and define network security rules for the VMs within a virtual network in Azure. Shared Access Signature, SAS, a secure signature that you can generate for a resource in Azure Storage, allowing you to grant limited access to the resource. IAM, Identity and Access Management, a set of security principles and policies that determine who has access to a resource in Azure and what they can do with it. RBAC, Role-Based Access Control, a way to control access to resources in Azure based on the role of the user who is requesting access. Docker Push, a command used to upload a Docker image to a Docker registry, such as Docker Hub or Azure Container Registry. ACR Build, Azure Container Registry Build, used to build and store Docker images in the cloud. ACR Create, Azure Container Registry Create, used to create a new instance of Azure Container Registry. Azure CLI, Azure Command Line Interface, used to manage Azure services and resources from the command line. This is the only way to migrate DNS zones easily by importing zone files. Azure Bash, Azure Shell for Linux, used to manage Azure services and resources from the Bash shell. Azure Cloud Shell, Azure Shell for Windows, used to manage Azure services and resources from the browser. Azure PowerShell, Azure module for Windows PowerShell, used to manage Azure services and resources using PowerShell. Network Performance Monitor, Azure service that monitors and analyzes network performance, identifies and resolves network issues. Gateway Transit, Azure feature that enables network-to-network connectivity between virtual networks. Set Azure RM Virtual Network Gateway default site allows you to route traffic. Sign-in Risk Policy, Azure security feature that sets policies to control access based on risk level of sign-in attempts. Managed Identities, Azure feature that manages and rotates service identities for Azure resources, eliminates the need for shared secrets to access resources. Enterprise Mobility, Azure solution that provides secure access to resources and identity management for employees, contractors, and partners. Security E3, Azure security bundle that includes Azure Advanced Threat Protection, Azure Information Protection, and Azure Conditional Access. Security E5, Azure security bundle that includes all features from E3, plus Azure Advanced Threat Analytics, Azure Defender, and Azure Sentinel. UEFI Boot, Unified Extensible Firmware Interface Boot, a firmware interface for starting and initializing operating systems. Service Bus Queue, Azure service used for reliable message delivery between applications and services. Service Bus Topic, Azure service used for publish-subscribe messaging pattern, where multiple receivers subscribe to a single message source. Event Grid Topic, Azure service used for event-driven messaging and triggering of actions in response to events. Scale in versus scale out. Scaling in refers to reducing the number of instances, while scaling out refers to increasing the number of instances. CORS and Web Apps. Cross-origin resource sharing, a mechanism to allow restricted resources on a web page to be requested from another domain outside the domain from which the resource originated. Grants. Permissions granted to access resources, such as a specific database or file. Session controls, to restrict access to a session. KQL examples. Keyword query language examples, used for querying data in Azure Log Analytics and Azure Sentinel. Start of week returns the start of the week, which is Sunday. End of the week is Saturday. Render creates a graph. Table name. Query. Selector. Level == critical, or event, search, error. Event, where event type == error. Search in, event, error. Cosmos DB, Azure database service for globally distributed, multi-model data. Read-only geo-redundant storage, Azure storage option that provides read-only access to data stored in a secondary region, in the event of a disaster in the primary region. Setup-complete.cmd, command script used to run custom extensions during the deployment of a virtual machine in Azure. Azure Activity Log, Azure service used to track changes and activity for resources in Azure. Access Policy, policy in Azure used to control access to resources and services. Live Metrics Stream in Application Insights, Azure feature that provides real-time streaming of metrics and telemetry data for application performance monitoring.